I ain't left out Baton Rouge. You think I left out Baton Rouge?
Say again?
I want you to know whether you're in a 360 or not. I want you to appreciate the culture that changed your life.
I wanted to slap you in your face, honestly.
Everyday struggle is an unforgettable part of hip-hop. Joe Budden was only on the show for 9 months, but in the first 3, the show already had several viral moments, and it didn't take long for it to take a spot as one of the top shows in hip-hop. The show had everything: entertainment value, insights, beef, and endless viral moments. And there has never been another that's been quite the same. So in this video, we'll take a look at the entire rise of the show. It all started with Joe Budden. For those who aren't familiar, Joe Budden started as a rapper in the early 2000s. He signed to Def Jam and had a hit song called Pump It Up. But he had the misfortune of being a lyricist at a time when hip-hop was moving away from lyricism. And he had a lot of problems with his label and never saw the level of success he believed he could have achieved, which left him a little bitter, angry, and jaded about the music industry as a whole. In 2015, he started a podcast which he called I'll Name This Podcast Later. He would later change the name to the Joe Budden Podcast, and over the years, it would go to be one of the top podcasts in the hip-hop space. On top of his podcast, Joe also decided he wanted to do a daily show about current events in hip-hop. He enlisted a friend named Elliot Wilson to host the show with him, and they decided to do the show on Complex. They got a moderator named Nadeska, who had been a Complex employee for a couple of years. Everything was set up, but Elliot changed his mind and decided he didn't want to be on the show. So at this point, the show had a good concept and one host, but if it was going to be successful, it needed a co-host, at least as close to entertaining as Joe. So Complex and Joe had a set of interviews to find one. They settled on a chipmunk-looking candidate named DJ Akademiks. In case you don't know who DJ Akademiks is, he started as a YouTuber covering hip-hop news in the early 10s and blew up with his series The War in Chirac, where he documented all the violence happening in Chicago tied to drill music. Akademiks and Joe were polar opposites from 2 different eras and 2 different worlds. Joe believed that this clash of views would bring entertainment to the show.
I didn't know much about him. I knew he had a following. I knew that they were big on him, but I didn't know him, and I didn't like him.
Is that why?
And that was perfect.
And he was completely right. The show debuted on April 10th, and it was entertaining from the jump. The first couple of episodes was just Joe screaming at and insulting Akademiks and just violating him in general.
Because the attention span of idiots like you is very, very tiny.
Hey, I watch every thing you do. You want to talk about it?
That's a lie.
I've seen your last 3 Twitches with them bum-ass escorts.
First of all,
I go to your Instagram every day and you talk about a whole bunch of bullshit. No,
They're all projects.
I just want to know if you are indeed this stupid. This nigga the fuck out of here, man.
Joe wasn't just going off on Akademiks though. He was going off on everybody, including Complex's staff.
It ain't about the podcast. I care about rap. Rap. No, you wrong. You just wrong. Shut the fuck up and be wrong. It's okay to be wrong.
While Joe spazzing on everyone was entertaining, it wasn't best for the show long term. And Joe realized this and calmed down a little in later episodes and started showing Akademiks more respect. He still had his moments where he would go off and start yelling at the top of his lungs, but they became more rare. After the show transitioned from just Joe yelling at Akademiks to them actually discussing topics and debating, the genius of Joe's initial decision to hire Akademiks started to show. They disagreed on a lot of topics and had very different views on rap, and it was entertaining to watch them go back and forth on different topics, and on top of this, they were both honest and didn't hold back on their opinions. Joe had his own podcast and didn't really rely on any industry connections for any reason, so he could speak his mind with no fear of consequence. And Akademiks had built his own platform by himself, so he didn't have any relationships to preserve, and it's common knowledge that Ak just stays in his basement, so he's never been worried about offending people. Joe and Ak's honesty is a major reason the show was so good, but what really made Everyday struggle the show it was the fact that they had to stand on these opinions. There were a lot of people doing their own thing independently who could speak how they wanted, but never had the answer to the artist they were speaking on. But Everyday Struggle was a big show on Complex, which made it a big enough platform that artists wanted to make appearances on the show, especially when Joe or Ak said something they didn't like. This was the case for a lot of guests, but the situation was actually reversed for the first ever guest on the show, Lil Yachty. Joe was not a fan of Lil Yachty, and in all the early episodes, he had something negative to say. He felt that Yachty was bad for the culture.
I never want to talk about Yachty. I don't think that Yachty is hip-hop. I don't think that Yachty's label is hip-hop.
Ak and Nadeska convinced Joe to agree to talk to Lil Yachty, and they convinced Yachty to come on the show. And this resulted in an iconic moment.
Business. You are happy 24/7. That is a lie.
So,
that is bull. And I refuse to have somebody tell me bull. I want to have an honest conversation.
When you come from,
I want you to know whether you're in a 360 or not. I want you to appreciate the culture that changed your life and took you from college dorm room eating oodles and noodles. I want you who's well-spoken and articulates himself well.
My nigga, chill.
Yeah, hold up. Yo.
This was Everyday Struggle's first super viral moment, and people made all types of memes about Joe yelling at Yachty. This trend of keeping the same energy continued with the very next guest to come on, who happened to be Wale. This episode was a big moment for Ak, because for years he had been in his basement saying whatever he wanted, knowing he would never run into the people he was covering. This was the first time he would have to stand on something he said. Ak really hadn't said anything crazy though. He had just talked about Wale flopping a few episodes back, and he had put out a video a while back talking about how people viewed Wale as corny. Ak stood his ground and kept the same energy, and the show just ended up with Ak and Wale going back and forth the whole episode. But the viewers loved it, and as of today, the episode is at 1.1 million views. After the Wale episode, the show continued as normal. The viewership had gone up because of these viral moments, and they had more big guests on like Joey Badass and SZA. And then the Vic Mensa episode happened. To everyone involved except Vic Mensa, everything seemed normal and regular. But then this happened.
You felt you were a little bit repulsed by the fact that so many people outside the culture of Chicago, they hyped up the music not knowing that real lives were being affected. How do you feel about it?
I wanted to slap you in your face, honestly. But I really felt as if people exactly like you sensationalized and made a following off of clowning situations that we go through in real life.
Ak didn't see anything like this coming, but if you think about it, it was destined to happen. He had spent years making jokes about things that probably shouldn't have been joked about, and a lot of people have probably taken offense over the years, and were just waiting to run into him. And Vic Mensa was just the first to do it. The Vic Mensa clip went viral, adding on to the growing list and putting even more eyes on the show. 8 days after the Vic Mensa episode, Everyday Struggle had the most viral moment ever. The situation started with Joe, Ak, and Nadeska walking around Complex Con interviewing different rappers when they spotted the Migos. Ak and Nadeska wanted to interview them, but Joe didn't. And this is the situation that resulted.
You being left off bad and bougie, like how do you feel?
I ain't left off bad and bougie. You think I'm left off bad and bougie?
Say again?
You say I'm left off bad and bougie?
What'd you say?
You say I'm left off bad and bougie?
Yeah.
Do it look like I'm left off bad and bougie?
What'd you say?
Do it look like I'm left off bad and bougie?
Nah, I mean it don't look like it.
All right, we gotta wrap this up though.
My bad. Happy trying to jump.
I couldn't hear anything.
Man, it's one of my favorite groups. I've been covering for so long. I'm glad they succeeded, man.
Hey man, you guys are nominated tonight. Have a good show.
This moment went viral twice, for both Ak not being able to understand Atlantanese and Joe walking off and almost running the Migos fade. This was the most viewed moment in Everyday Struggle history, and at the time of this video, the clip is sitting at around 11 million views, and it even inspired the Migos to drop a song called Ice Tray, with the famous bar, "If a nigga hatin', call him Joe Budden." Moving on from the Migos incident, Everyday Struggle was only 3 months in, but already one of the top, if not most viewed hip-hop show on YouTube. The show continued rolling and gaining more notoriety. Everything was running smoothly, and the show had a good rhythm. Joe and Ak would still go at it from time to time, but for the most part, they worked out a good rapport. Joe provided valuable insights that only someone previously involved with labels could give, and Akademiks discussed numbers and the perception she saw from the youth on YouTube. And Nadeska moderated the most anyone could possibly be expected to moderate, and also served as the voice of reason in certain situations, chiming in with her own opinions when necessary. On top of these three, they had all the big names in rap. People like 21 Savage, Jeezy, SZA, G Herbo, Vince Staples, 2 Chainz, and many more. Things seemed like they could only go up, but the whole time there were cracks in the foundation. From the beginning of the show, Joe made it very clear that he had grievances with Complex over money and the way they did business. He had a running joke about him not doing Friday episodes because Complex didn't cut the check.
Check us out on Monday to make Complex cut the check for Fridays. Complex is still not cut the check yet for the Friday show, so we will not see you tomorrow.
Along the way, Joe found out that Complex had been making deals with sponsors for Everyday Struggle and not sharing any of this money. And in December, when his contract ran out and they didn't give him the amount of money he asked for, it was the final straw. He walked away from the show, decided not to renew his contract.
When my contract was over, I wanted 50 grand a month. They came back and said something like 40, and that's what that was about.
This was basically the end of Everyday Struggle. The show was his idea, and he was the most irreplaceable host on the show. Despite this fact, Complex tried to continue the show. They experimented with a couple new hosts to take Joe's spot, and finally settled on a candidate named Wayno. Wayno, Ak, and Nadeska all had good chemistry, and the show wasn't bad, but it wasn't the same. It might as well have been a completely different show. The whole dynamic had changed. There were still some viral moments and beefs that originated in the later version of Everyday Struggle, but it didn't compare. The show went on and lasted until December of 2020, when Complex finally canceled it for good.